Hey guys, Lord Naren White here, the Holy Ghost, the one true God, back with you with the next video in my series reading Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens. Without further ado, returning to Oliver Twist as read by Lord Naren White. Now, with regard to this here robbery, master, said Blathers, what are the circumstances? Mr. Losberne, who appeared desirous of gaining time, recounted them at great length and with much circumlocution. Messrs. Blathers and Duff looked very knowingly meanwhile and occasionally exchanged a nod. I can't say for certain till I see the work, of course, said Blathers. But my opinion at once is, I don't mind committing myself to that extent, that this wasn't done by a yokel, eh, Duff? Certainly not, replied Duff. And translating the word yokel for the benefit of the ladies, I apprehend your meaning to be that this attempt was not made by a countryman? Said Mr. Losberne with a smile. That's it, master, replied Blathers. This is all about the robbery, is it? All, replied the doctor. Now what is this? About this here boy that the servants are still a-talking on, said Blathers. Nothing at all, replied the doctor. One of the frightened servants chose to take it into his head that he had something to do with this attempted break into the house, but it's nonsense, sheer absurdity. Very easy disposed of it is, if it is, remarked Duff. What he says is quite correct, observed Blathers, nodding his head in a confirmatory way, and playing carelessly with the handcuffs, as if there were a pair of castanets. Who is the boy? What account does he give of himself? Where did he come from? He couldn't drop out of the clouds, did he, master? Of course not, replied the doctor, with a nervous glance at the two ladies. I know his whole history, but we can talk about that presently. You would like first to see the place where the thieves made their attempt, I suppose? Certainly, rejoined Mr. Blathers. We had better inspect the premises first, and examine the servants afterwards. That's the usual way of doing business. Lights were then procured, and Messrs. Blathers and Duff, attended by the native constable, Brittles, Giles, and everybody else in short, went into the little room at the end of the passage and looked out at the window, and afterwards round by the way of the lawn and looked in at the window, and after that had a candle out to inspect the shutter with, and after that a lantern to trace the footsteps with, and after that a pitchfork to poke the bushes with. This done amidst the breathless interest of all beholders, they came in again, and Mr. Giles and Brittles were put through a melodramatic representation of their own share in the previous night's adventures, when they performed 6 times over, contradiction each other. It is not more than one important respect. The first time it is not more than a dozen the last. The consummation being arrived at, Blathers and Duff cleared the room, and held a long council together, compared with which, for secrecy and solemnity, a consultation of great doctors on the knottiest point in medicine would be mere child's play. Meanwhile, the doctor walked up and down the next room in a very uneasy state, and Mrs. Maylie and Rose looked on with anxious faces. Upon my word, he said, making a halt after a great number of very rapid turns, I hardly know what to do. Surely, said Rose, the poor child's story, faithfully repeated to these men, will be sufficient to exonerate them. I doubt it, my dear young lady, said the doctor, shaking his head. I don't think it would exonerate him either with them or with the legal functionaries of a higher grade. What is he, after all, they would say, a runaway? Judged by the worldly considerations and probabilities, his story is a very doubtful one. You believe it, surely, interrupted Rose. I believe it, as strange as it is, and perhaps I may be an old fool for doing so, rejoined the doctor, but I don't think it is exactly the tale for a practical police officer nevertheless. Why not? Demanded Rose. Because, my pretty cross-examiner, replied the doctor, because, viewed with their eyes, there are many ugly points about it. He can only prove that the parts that look ill, and none of those that look well. Confound the fellows, they will have the way and the the wherefore and will take nothing for granted. On his own showing, you see he has been the companion of thieves for some time past. He has been carried to a police officer on a charge of picking a gentleman's pocket. He has been taken away forcibly from that gentleman's house to a place which he cannot describe or point out, and of the situation of which he has not the remotest idea. He is brought down to Chertsey by men who seem to have taken a violent fancy to him, whether he will or not, and is put through a window to rob a house. And then, just at the very moment when he is going to alarm the inmates, and so doing the very thing that would set him all to rights, there rushes into the way a blundering dog of a half-bred butler and shoots him, as if on purpose to prevent his doing any good for himself. Don't you see all of this?" "I see it, of course," replied Rose, smiling at the doctor's impetuosity. "But I still do not see anything in it to criminate the poor child." "No," replied the doctor, "of course not. Bless the bright eyes of your sex. They never see, whether for good or bad, more than one side of any question, and that is always the one which presents itself to them." Having given vent to this result of experience, the doctor put his hands into his pockets and walked up and down the room with even greater rapidity than before. "The more I think of it," said the doctor, "the more I see that it will occasion endless trouble and difficulty if we put these men in possession of the boy's real story. I am certain it will not be believed, and if anything, they can do nothing to him in the end. Still, the dragging it forward, and giving publicity to all the doubts that will be cast upon it, must interfere materially with your benevolent plan of rescuing him from misery." "Oh, what is to be done?" cried Rose. "Dear, dear, why did they send for these people?" "Why, indeed," exclaimed Mrs. Maylie, "I would not have had them here for the world." "All I know is," said Mr. Losberne, at last sitting down with a kind of desperate calmness, "that we must try and carry it off with a bold face. The object is a good one, and that must be our excuse. The boy has strong symptoms of fever upon him, and is in no condition to be talked to any more. That's one comfort. We must make the best of it, and if the best be the best, it is no fault of ours. Come in." "Well, master," said Blathers, entering the room followed by his colleague, and making the door fast before he said any more, "this weren't a put-up thing?" "And what the devil's a put-up thing?" demanded the doctor impatiently. "We call it a put-up robbery, ladies," said Blathers, turning to them, as if he pitied their ignorance, but had a contempt for the doctors. "When the servants is in it?" "Nobody suspected them in this case," said Mrs. Maylie. "Very likely not, ma'am," replied Blathers. "But they might have been in it for all that." "More likely on that very account," said Duff. "We find it was a town hand," said Blathers, continuing his report, "for the style of work is first-rate." "Very pretty indeed," remarked Duff in an undertone. "There was 2 of them in it," continued Blathers, "and they had a boy with them. That's plain from the size of the window. That's all to be said at present. We'll see this lad that you've got upstairs at once, if you please." "Perhaps they will take something to drink with first, Mrs. Maylie?" said the doctor, his face brightening, as if some new thought had occurred to him. "Oh, to be sure," exclaimed Rose eagerly. "You shall have it immediately, if you will." "Why, thank you, miss," said Blathers, drawing his coat sleeve across his mouth. "It's dry work, this sort of duty. Anything that's handy, miss. Don't put yourself out of the way on our accounts." "What shall it be?" asked the doctor, following the young lady to the sideboard. "A little drop of spirits, master, is all the same," replied Blathers. "It's a cold ride from London, ma'am, and I always find that spirits come home warmer to the feelings." And we'll go ahead and stop there for this week. As usual, I want to say thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Please like, comment, and subscribe, as it greatly helps the channel. Light be with you all. Take care, and thanks again.